Okay, for today's lecture we will be going over photosynthesis. We need to know the parts of the leaf in order to make reference to that because they need to have a structure and the function of each. So if we look inside the leaf, we're going to have veins. Just like the veins in our body, it's going to carry nutrients, like our veins carry blood. The veins of a leaf will carry water and minerals. And the minerals that we're going to be talking about is food. Okay? Now, we're going to break that vein up into two parts. So we have xylem. It has a Z sound, but it's X-Y-L-E-M. And this is going to move the water. Okay? So for these parts, you need to know not only what it transports, or sometimes it'll say conducts, which in this case is meaning to transport. So the water is moving up the plant. And so when we're saying it's going up the plant, it's going from the roots and then to the stem and eventually the leaves. Okay? So think of it just like a straw. So when you go to get a drink, the straw is very large. Then it's going to move up from the bottom of the glass to you. Okay, the next structure of the vein is called the phloem. Now this one is going to move the food. So those are the minerals. Okay, so phloem. So you can remember that makes an F sound for both. In this case, it's moving both up and down the plant. Okay, so if it's going up the plant, that would be if you add any fertilizer. Okay, down the plant would be the food made by the leaves, made from photosynthesis, which is the basis of this lecture. Okay, so that's why it goes up and down. Okay, so let's look at what the vein looks like. Maybe you've done a leaf rubbing when you were in grade school, and so all the lines of the leaf, when you ran the crayon over the paper, all of those lines are the veins. So here is what they call a cross section. So if you held the leaf on the side, you cut across it. And so this structure right here, maybe kind of hard to see with the red, is the vein. Okay, so the structures that make up the vein, and so here's the actual cells. So this entire part here is the vein. Now, you can always tell the difference between the xylem and the phloem by the size. So you got to remember, since it's only going up the plant, the xylem carries water, and it goes up the plant. Think of big straws. So here we got two really big xylem tubes. Phloem moves food both up and down. So there's a lot of the little circles, tubes. And then everything around it is a connective tissue, and it holds the bundle together. So the outside yellow cells, okay, that would be the vascular bundle. Okay, so sometimes they'll even talk that the vascular bundle is the entire vein. So sometimes they'll call it that. Okay, so this is what we were looking at, the cross section. So here's my leaf. Here they took a little wedge out. And so if I come right here, here's the xylem and the phloem. So this part right here is just one vein. Okay, so let's look at some other structures. Okay, the cells between the upper and lower epidermis. So here's the epidermis. Now there's another layer of cells right on top of it, and it's called the cuticle. Okay, so that's the cuticle, and this wider part here, right below it, is the epidermis. And the same thing is on the bottom, except it's the lower cuticle and the lower epidermis. Okay? So that's the protective. And so you can remember the epidermis, think of it as skin. Okay? So it's like skin. So the place where photosynthesis is going to take place is in this area between the epidermis. And that is called the mesophyll. Okay? So mesophyll. Meso, middle. Okay? One way I kind of tell students in the past to think of it, think of the epidermis, and we said it was the skin, but the epidermis would be like two pieces of bread, and everything in between it would be the meat of your sandwich, okay, if you're making a sandwich. So the mesophyll is your meat, and you notice I've got two different types of meat here. Okay, so photosynthesis is going to take place in the mesophyll, okay? So keep in mind, this is the top of the leaf, and this is the bottom of the leaf. And so we're going to focus on what all these little spaces are. So these are air spaces, and that's going to be very important. And what's going to be moving in and out is carbon dioxide, water in the form of a gas, and the other one I don't have listed here would be the oxygen that the plant is going to release out into the environment. Okay, so here's a cross section, very close up. So all of these cells in between here, okay, all of these, that's the palisade, and we'll get to those. I'll have those up here in just a second. And all these kind of irregular shapes with air spaces between them, that is the spongy mesophyll. So the mesophyll are two different types. Palisade, and it's always found toward the top of the leaf, and the spongy is more toward the bottom. Okay, another way you can tell the difference is the shape and how they're located close to one another in proximity. So palisade are always nice rectangle boxes that are lined up nice, even, and straight. Okay, just like going on here. Spongy, like a sponge, a natural sponge, they're kind of irregular shape. They got some spaces between them. Okay. Now you'll notice there's some other terms here. I got palisade layer, palisade, it's a mouthful, parenchyma, and palisade mesophyll. I don't care which term you use, layer, parenchyma, or mesophyll. Any of those three would be fine if you're to fill in the blank part of the test. And spongy is the same way, layer, parenchyma, or mesophyll. I would suggest using the word mesophyll, that way you know what it's talking about, just to be consistent. Okay, the epidermis I already mentioned is like bread or your skin. So there's an upper and lower epidermis, and it's a single layer. And the key here, there are no air spaces. So it kind of keeps everything in. Now, I've got to have gas exchange. So I'm going to have special structures I'll talk about in a second that allows gases to go in and out, but they're packed pretty close. Now, if I go back to my picture, on top of the epidermis is something called the cuticle. This cuticle is a waxy covering. Okay, it repels water. So think of the epidermis. Here's another example here. So if this would be like my lips, the skin of my lips, okay, the cuticle would be like lip balm. Okay, so I put the cuticle on top of the epidermis. I put lip balm, which can be waxy, kind of helps keep the moisture in. I put the lip balm on my lips. So maybe that will help you think of it. Okay, so here's my image again. So here is my cuticle, very thin, flat tissue, waxy covering, protection. Here's my upper epidermis is the purple, the pink is the lower epidermis. My mesophyll, the meat, is in the middle. Notice how nice and neat my palisade layer is. So it's these area between here, nice and neat, elongated. Spongy, there's white air spaces between it. Here is my, I don't have this label, but here's my vein, or you can put vascular bundle. And then we're going to talk about what these structures are. Now remember we said that the epidermis and both the cuticle, there's no space in between the cells, so gases can't get it out. But I've got to have gas exchange for water vapor, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, which is all needed for photosynthesis. So I've got to have some way to get that in and out. And so the first structure is the stomata or the stomate. Okay, stoma, I usually use the word stomata because there's another word that's called stroma, and here spelling is very important. Okay, just this R, two different structures in the leaf. Okay, so the stomata is the actual opening. right here, opening. So it'd be like the pores in your skin. So the actual opening, not the green structure, okay, that's something else, but it's the opening, the hole itself. So it'd be like the doorway. And then the guard cells, those are the green structures, okay? So there's 2 guard cells on each side. There's 1, and here's 2, okay? So there's 2 of them on each side. And this one has a little opening, and so these guard cells control how much gas can get in and out. So they open and they close. So the guard cells would be like the actual door itself that you can open and close. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, now, I've said don't rely on color. I know this looks like kind of some weird reptile with the eye, but it's just a neon computer generated. And so this structure right here that's opening is the stomata. And then here's 1 and 2, and those are the guard cells. Okay, just to show you that color does not matter. Now, what's going to cause, or the process for the water going in and out of the leaf, the evaporation of water, so that's water vapor, leaving, so the stomatas, the guard cells and the stomatas have to be open. This process is called transpiration. Okay, transpiration. Now, one problem with this, if it's open, so here's the little holes right here. So if these are open so that the gases can get out, if water vapor is leaving, it's depleting the amount of water that's available for the plant. And when you don't water your plants, they tend to wilt. So that is a problem, but they still need to be open for that gas exchange, okay? Now, pull my images in here. Now, most plants, and that would be like plants in this area, normal climate, the guard cells themselves, and hence the stomata, are open during the day, and they tend to close down at night. Okay, that's if it's really hot outside, then it'll tend to shorten that time that it's open so that it doesn't lose too much water vapor. Now there's an exception, desert plants. It's so hot during the day. If it opened its stomata during the day, it would lose a lot more water than it can bring in. So if that's the case, then they actually have a different system. I mean, their cells even look different, to where in desert plants, they're open at night and closed during the day, so it's the opposite, and there's actually a test question on that. So if you just keep in mind, anytime those stomatas are closed, carbon dioxide is not available for the plant, and so photosynthesis is just going to really slow down. So here's my palisade and spongy mesophyll again. Now you notice all these little dots. Okay, here's a dot, here's a dot, 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 dot. Okay, and if I come over here to actual cells, so here is a plant cell. There's a rectangle. And all these little green dots in here, those are chloroplasts. Now, chloroplast is the actual structure where photosynthesis is going to take place. Okay, so chloroplast. So these 2 structures are inside the chloroplast. So we have something called thylakoid, and sometimes they'll put thylakoid membranes. So if you think of membranes as a flattened sac, and these thylakoids will have pigments that's used for light reaction. Okay, when I have a stack of thylakoids, that is called grana or granum, singular plural. Now, the reason they are stacked, okay, so if I have just one thylakoid membrane, and I have light coming in, and this membrane absorbs the sunlight for photosynthesis, because plants need light for photosynthesis. If I have just one, now it'll absorb quite a bit of light, and maybe over here I'll have another one. Sunlight can actually penetrate several of these. So get more bang for the buck, the leaf will actually have stacks of thylakoid membranes, and it looks like stacks of coins. Usually that's what it looks like. Okay, and so each of these is a membrane, thylakoid membrane, and this whole structure is a grana. Okay, so that's the difference whether it's just one or a stack. So here's a chloroplast. So all those little dots that we saw in the cross section of the leaf, and this is in the mesophyll. Okay, the chloroplast. Here is one of those coins. There's one thylakoid membrane. Here is a whole stack. Okay, we're going to get to the stroma in just a second. And don't worry about these membranes. We're just going to focus on thylakoid, grana, and stroma. Okay, so the stroma, remember I said spelling is really important because of the letter R. Remember the other word, stoma, and that's why I usually add stomata. Okay, so if you use the word stoma, make sure you're careful on the spelling. Okay, so stroma with an R, and again, remember we are inside the chloroplast. So I'm just going to write this down here. Inside chloroplast. Okay, so this is where dark reactions will take place. Dark reactions. And light reactions are going to take place in the thylakoid. So when we're talking about reactions, okay, for light and dark, and I'll get to these little ways to help you remember it, these two together make up photosynthesis. And we're going to, our next lecture, I'm going to go more in depth into light and dark reactions. So just for right now, just know that photosynthesis is broken into light and dark reactions. And just know where it takes place. So inside the chloroplast, the thylakoid membranes, also if it's a stack of them, the grana, is where light reactions take place. So the L for light and thylakoid is how you can remember that. And then for R, in dark reaction, you have the stroma, the R, and so hopefully those two ways to help you think of that. Now, what causes or initiates photosynthesis is the attraction or the absorption of sunlight. So light is the key here. Now, we need to have something that will absorb the light in the chloroplast, and that is called chlorophyll. Now you notice, so you don't mix these up, a plast is the structure, there we go, and the fill is a pigment. I had a professor that told me that Phil is a pig. So luckily we didn't have anybody named Phil in our class. Okay, so chlorophyll, Phil is the pigment, plast is the actual structure. Now when we talk about chloroplast, chloroplast is the green color. So chlora is green. And there are two types. There's an A and a B chlorophyll, and they usually have this italicized. And what it does, if you think of the wavelengths of light in a prism, the spectrum, now we're not going to get too in-depth into that, but you do need to know what's absorbed and what's reflected. So for chlorophyll, what's absorbed from the wavelengths of light is the color violet and blue, and also orange and red. And what is reflected is green. So whatever is reflected is the color. That's why usually in the wintertime you wear dark clothes, because the darker colors absorb the light to keep you warm. And in the summertime you wear lighter colored clothes to reflect the light, the wavelengths of light. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on here. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's just kind of put everything together, and I'll go more in depth with the thylakoids and stroma in the next lecture. So starting with my leaf, very broad, go to a plant cell. Inside the cell, one of the organelles is the chloroplast. Inside the chloroplast is a structure called a thylakoid membrane. So one of these is a thylakoid, and a stack of those is the grana. If I look at one of the membranes, and I go here, we'll talk more about this also, but these are the pigments. This little green blob here, that is the chlorophyll that has the pigment. That's going to absorb the light, and inside then I'll start breaking water and everything else that plants need. Okay, so we know they need light and they need water, and then the other gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, are going to come into play. Okay, so that will finish up this lecture. And again, anytime you need to review it, I strongly recommend it, especially on this unit,